So let's dig a bit deeper into some of those stories and check out other ones. If we start with the Washington Post, it looks at the US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who's resigned, and she's leaving her post in January. The paper says Ms. Haley leaves Mr. Trump's orbit as a political force who could potentially pose a threat to the president. In the UK, The Independent carries a warning from the Bank of England that the need for action is now pressing to ward off risks to trillions of pounds of financial products from a cliff-edge Brexit. The bank said timely actions needed from the EU to protect against disruption to derivatives, insurance contracts and the transfer of personal data. We will explain, don't worry. Telegraph leads with the news the Royal College of Psychiatrists is to review its opposition to the legalisation of cannabis, despite its concerns over the risks the drug poses to users' mental health. It's setting up a panel to consider decriminalisation in the wake of more countries legalising the drug. The Guardian focuses on World Mental Health Day and the report from The Lancet, which says every country around the world is facing and failing to tackle this issue, from epidemics of anxiety and depression to conditions causing violence and trauma. And The Telegraph talks about the British government asking schools to monitor children's happiness and mental health, this all in an effort to tackle growing levels of anxiety among young people. You can see the theme today, can't you? We've got Geraint Anderson back, ex-City London stockbroker, author of City Boy, columnist. Good to have you with us again.
Thanks.
So you've been busy reading all of this since I last saw you.
Yes.
And let's start with the Washington Post. Nikki Haley, she has said she's going, which was a real surprise. She's seen as a rising star within US politics and a fan of President Trump. I don't know if you could describe it that way, but he's certainly a fan of hers.
Yeah, and she's been pretty loyal. And there's no real explanation for this sudden departure. The timing's a bit odd, just before the November midterms. There's obviously the conspiracy theorists are out in force, saying that she's going to kind of run against the president in 2020, but she's already denied that and said, don't be silly. It's just a bit odd, the timing and the fact it's such a surprise and it's so abrupt. And she has had her run-ins with Trump before. There was a time when she said something about Trump sanctions on Russia. And then he was said, oh no, she's confused. And she said something along the lines of, I don't get confused. So she's seen as a rising star. She's done this move. People are unsure about what it means, but perhaps she's just found a better job. You know, there is always the simple solution.
There is always a simple solution, but as you say, that the speculation is rife on Capitol Hill.
Well, they don't last very long, you see.
And she was very quick to say, actually, in the press conference, I'm not going to run against President Trump in 2020. In fact, I'm going to support his campaign. But the thinking is that she may well run after him. Yes. After his 2 terms, assuming he gets a second term, of course. Interesting she makes this announcement this side of the midterm elections. Yeah, it is
odd. I mean, you know, and even if she were to run in 2024, why would that dictate that she removes herself from Trump's orbit at this point? So that's why that doesn't, I don't think that necessarily makes sense.
Watch this space.
Yes, but maybe it's just to do with problems. You know, we've got the Mueller, you've got that. Maybe the midterms will be problematic because, you know, Trump will lose support. So there are other reasons why she might feel it's best out of there right now.
Well, we'll watch this space. As I say, let's keep an eye on Nikki Haley, that's for sure. Let's talk about the Bank of England now. Warns EU over £41 trillion of risk to derivatives from Brexit.
Yes.
What does that mean, Geraint? All these warnings we're getting from the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of England, and all of us are trying to make sense of this.
Well, I mean, you know, derivatives are what Warren Buffett referred to as financial weapons of mass destruction. They're generally used to hedge exposure for large financial institutions. And clearly, the Bank of England feels that whilst we've done our bit to make sure that we're prepared for Brexit and the legal complications that may arise.
When you say we, you mean UK banks?
The UK banks, the European Union have not done that.
Financial institutions in the UK.
Yes, and the political institutions have done the necessary legislation. They feel that the European Union has not done this, and this is yet another one of these, the law of unintended consequences. From Brexit, we will now have legal issues potentially related to these derivatives, these hedging instruments, and I think it principally relates to the fact that we have large clearing banks in the city who will no longer be able to perform that function as we will leave the EU, and it could be
in April of next
in
year.
April 29th, let's say. This could be a major headache.
But presumably the European Central Bank, they're on it.
You'd like to think so. Yeah, I mean, it's
kind of their job to do that.
The numbers are so preposterously large that you can't really get your head around 41 trillion pounds worth of derivatives. But you'd like to think that they'd get their act together, but they haven't got much time. That's the problem.
They haven't. The clock is ticking extremely swiftly. Just to say, before we do move on from that, I mean, I'm sure you've been hearing what we were discussing in Bali with both Kamal and Adrian Tobias, the guests from the IMF. Your thoughts on where we're at with regards to, you know, the global economy, finance, everything? Are you worried? Are you having sleepless nights?
I wouldn't say I'm having sleepless nights because I'm not exposed anymore like I used to be when I was used to have shares and used to work in the city. So personally, I'm not too concerned, but I am concerned generally. Yes, high levels of debt, potential trade war, these issues.
And the uncertainty surrounding Brexit.
The uncertainty surrounding for us, for our country specifically, for the world, I suppose it's not quite such a big issue. You know, I do worry that there'll be some geopolitical event and something like Israel will attack Iran or something like that, and this could cause problems, especially since we've got the high oil price already. So yes, everything what goes up must come down, and we have been going up quite well since the financial crisis.
Certainly the share markets have on Wall Street.
And
Absolutely.
so yes, there could be trouble ahead.
Okay. In your view?
In my view.
That's Geraint's prediction.
Whenever someone says yes, it's quite a bland.
I'm sure many are thinking, I hope he's wrong. Fingers crossed he's wrong. OK, Daily Telegraph, front page. Cannabis review could relax drug laws. This is the Royal College of Psychiatrists looking into the opposition to legalisation of cannabis, despite concerns about the risk to mental health. This is because many countries around the world, and in the US it's quite high profile, some states like Colorado, it's legalised. It's a huge business, a huge industry now in these states. It's a massive money spinner. Give us your take on this and this issue in the UK.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of fairly libertarian in my views. I think that to have cannabis outlawed when alcohol, which is far more dangerous and far more, you don't go for a fight at the pub after you smoked a joint. But you do after a few drinks, or some people do.
They may not be domestic violence.
They're not. Those things are more. So in theory, I think it's the correct way to go, and we're actually falling behind countries like Canada and lots of states in America, Portugal. And it's something that we should go down this road. My only minor concern is that with these very strong strains of weed, of marijuana that you get now, this sort of THC 30% skunk, and those things, I have seen an association with those and people having mental health issues. And there were 3 kids at my school who, as a direct result of smoking marijuana, had major mental health issues, and that's my only issue.
Very strong arguments for and against. I remember when we discussed this on the briefing before, we had viewers getting in touch saying, there's some parts of London, frankly, it's called, known as Little Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's basically legal anyway. People walking around smoking joints.
It's smoked freely. There doesn't seem to be any kind of, policing of it, that kind of thing in the UK already. But for many who want to use cannabis oil and other things for medicinal purposes, it's a very important issue. Let's look now at the 2 mental health stories then. So we've got The Guardian, which is focusing on the report done by the Lancet Medical Journal, looking at the global problem. But then you've got front page of the Telegraph looking at, in the UK, they're going to monitor young people in schools.
Yes.
It's quite, I mean, the Guardian article is extremely gloomy, and the report is damning, isn't it, in terms of lack of investment, lack of money being put into this issue, this problem, trying to tackle it around the world.
Absolutely. It's been so brushed under the carpet, not just in the UK. There was a stigma associated with it. I think that we've had more socio-cultural change in the last 50, 60 years than the previous 500, and I think people are struggling to cope. I think men in this country particularly are really struggling. It's the biggest cause of death is suicide for men under the age of 45. It's a massive epidemic of anxiety and depression. It's stress, it's social media causing these issues. And, it's very worrying. I've got 2 young kids, and I worry about the world that they're coming into, the mental pressures.
I mean, there are some that have put this into the, into the forefront globally. Prince Harry, for example, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who are involved in events today here in the UK. They have done a lot. Many others, actually, have done a lot to campaign for this. Schools to monitor their pupils' happiness. If we can help them at that age, perhaps it will set them on a path for life.
Absolutely, and schools are places where, you know, the problems begin. You've got bullying, you've got social media, you've got bulimia and anorexia being quite regular, self-harm, all these things, so that it makes complete sense that kids should be monitored and that the problems should be nipped in the bud. And I think anything that does that, when you consider that there's, you know, almost a million people committing suicide every year, then I think anything that can avoid those kind of stresses and those kind of problems is to be encouraged massively.
All right, thank you, Geraint. Thanks for your input this morning.